Hi everyone, this video is in English because it's another video about grammar. Today I'm going to talk about the word svoj because that's one of the topics that you requested last time. And I'm going to talk about when to use svoj and I'm going to give some examples. And also I'm going to focus on when it's absolutely necessary to use svoj and when it's optional and not using it will not cause any misunderstandings. So svoj means somebody's own, for example, my own, your own, his own, etc. In other words, in grammar words, it's a possessive pronoun, a reflexive possessive pronoun. And I know that in English you want to make a distinction between possessive pronouns and possessive adjectives, but we don't have a distinction like that in Slovak, so in this video I'm just going to use the term possessive pronouns. So possessive pronouns in general express possession or ownership, something belonging to someone. Here's a table of possessive pronouns in Slovak. You've probably seen a table like this before. If you're learning Slovak with a textbook or a course, you probably learned these pronouns before learning about svoj. I am not going to spend much time on this because if this is new for you, you can find many resources about this and I can put some links below in the description. But as you can see, each grammatical person has a corresponding possessive pronoun in singular and plural. So for example, môj means my or mine, tvoj means your or yours, etc. Of course, these are just the basic forms and they will have different endings depending on the gender, number and case of the noun that they're modifying, except for the third person pronouns, jeho, jej and ich, which don't decline. In just a second, I will give you some examples, some sentences, and there you will see these pronouns with different endings. So, where does svoj fit into this? Svoj is used with all of the persons when the thing that it describes is owned by the grammatical subject of the sentence. So, when the grammatical subject is the owner of the thing, then we use svoj. Let's look at some examples right now. I think it will be much clearer with examples. Toto je Maja a Maja má mačku. Toto je Majina mačka, Micka. Maja má rada Micku. Maja má rada Micku. Tak Maja má rada svoju mačku. Maja má rada svoju mačku. We use svoju in this case, svoju, because Maja is the owner of the cat, grammatically speaking, and Maja is also the subject of the sentence. So the subject is the owner, that means I have to use svoj, or svoju in this case. You can see that svoj also has different endings for different grammatical categories. So svoju is the accusative singular feminine form. The mistake that some students make is that they're like, okay, Maja loves her cat. Her cat, let's look at the table. Her translates to jej. So I should say Maja má rada jej mačku, right? Well, let's see what happens if we say jej mačku. Maja má rada jej mačku means Maja loves her cat. See, the translation in English is the same in both sentences, but the meaning is different. In this first sentence, Maja má rada svoju mačku, it means Maja loves her own cat, Micka. But this second sentence, even though the translation is the same, Maja loves someone else's cat. We don't know whose cat, but we know it's not her cat. So I don't know if you've noticed this before, but a sentence like this, like Maja loves her cat, in English is actually ambiguous. That means that it has two potential meanings. Either it can mean Maja loves her own cat, or Maja loves another woman's cat. In English, we have to rely on context to know whose cat it is. Like if you saw this sentence, Maya loves her cat, and no other person apart from Maya was mentioned previously, then it's reasonable to assume that it's Maya's cat, but theoretically it's not clear. But in Slovak, we never have this ambiguity thanks to svoj. Svoj always makes it clear. Let's look at another example. Toto je Lucia. Lucia is Maya's friend, and Lucia doesn't have a cat, but she loves Maya's cat too. So we could say Lucia má rada jej mačku. Here it's totally appropriate to use jej because Lucia is the subject of the sentence, but she's not the owner of the cat. So the subject and the owner are different. That's why we use jej. Here it's correct because Lucia doesn't love her own cat. She loves Maya's cat. So these examples were in the third person, but let's look at an example, the same example in first person. Okay? Maja hovorí. Mám rada svoju mačku. Again, we use svoju because the grammatical subject is the owner of the cat. Here, the subject is I, ja, and it might be a little bit tricky to realize that because in Slovak we don't necessarily have to write ja in the sentence, so you can imagine a little ja in brackets in the sentence because it was only implied in the sentence, but still. Okay, now the question is, would it be correct to say mám rada moju mačku? Can Maya say mám rada moju mačku? Actually, it wouldn't be incorrect. Why? Let's look at the table again. Here we have the table. In third person, the meaning is completely different depending on whether you use jej or svoja, as we have seen in the example right now. So the meaning is different, and for example, if you use jej when the owner was the subject of the sentence, then people are going to misunderstand what you're trying to say because you should have said svoja. And this is true for all third-person pronouns. So for jeho, jej, and ich. For masculine, feminine, and plural, all the red ones. In this video, I'm only using jej as an example of third-person pronoun, but it's true about all of these. But in first and second person, both singular and plural, so all of these yellow ones. In this video, I'm only using môj as an example, but the same thing is true for all the yellow pronouns. In this case, there isn't a confusion. The meaning doesn't really change in first and second person. I guess when you are talking about I, there is only one possible I to refer to, or if you're talking to someone, there's only one possible you, but there's too many options for the third person. So both of these sentences are completely acceptable and correct. It's just that if you want to sound more like a native speaker of Slovak, it's better to go for svoju. Mám rada svoju mačku. The second one, mám rada moju mačku, is correct. There's going to be no misunderstanding, but it doesn't sound so natural. Native speakers do sometimes use sentences like this, like mám rada moju mačku, and they do it for stylistic reasons. For example, to add emphasis or to add emotion, etc. So it's possible and it comes up quite often. But if you are going for a neutral sentence, then moju doesn't sound quite natural and svoju is better. I am going to show you a couple more examples. Notice the difference between these two sentences. Zuzka býva v svojom dome. Zuzka býva v jej dome. So the English translation is the same for both of these. Zuzka lives in her house, but the meaning is different. In the first sentence, Zuzka býva v svojom dome, the meaning is Zuzka lives in her own house. But in the second sentence, Zuzka býva v jej dome, it means Zuzka lives in another woman's house. We don't know who the other woman is. Maybe it's her mom's house, maybe it's her partner's house, her friend's house, her landlady's house. We don't know, but we know for sure it's not Zuzka's house. The next example is very similar to this. Maja číta svoju knihu. Maja číta jej knihu. Again, the English translation is the same for both. But in the first sentence, Maja is reading her own book. And in the second case, Maja is reading someone else's book, maybe her friend's book. How about in the first person? Let's look at the same example in first person. Maja hovorí, čítam svoju knihu. She could also say, čítam moju knihu. Both of these are correct. The first one, čítam svoju knihu, sounds a little bit more native and a little bit more neutral. Čítam moju knihu means the same thing. I'm reading my book. And if really the book belongs to her friend or to someone else, then she can say čítam jej knihu. And in this case, the meaning is different than in the first two examples. I hope it is clear so far, and the last thing that I want to tell you is give you some examples of sentences where the grammatical subject is not the owner, just to keep in mind the distinction. And in the end, I will include one example which is a little bit confusing or tricky. So let's go back to Maja's cat for a second. Mám rada svoju mačku. We have already explained why there is svoju in this sentence, so that should be clear. But let's look at two more sentences. Toto je moja mačka a moja mačka sa volá Micka. This is my cat. My cat's name is Micka. These two statements here, we cannot use svoja because that would be nonsense, because Maja is not the grammatical subject of the sentence, even though she is the owner. If we used svoja, for example, if we said svoja mačka sa volá Micka, that would sound super weird, and I don't know what that would even mean. I guess that would mean that the cat belongs to herself, because she's the grammatical subject of the sentence, and that is true in the philosophical sense, because non-human animals are their own independent beings. They're not just our pets. So yeah, philosophically it makes sense, but grammatically not really. It doesn't work. And the same is true in third person. So here I have similar sentences in third person. Maja má rada svoju mačku. Again, we use svoja because Maja is both the owner and the subject. And these second sentences, toto je jej mačka sa volá Micka, we have to use jej because svoja would make no sense, just like in the examples in first person. These sentences are correct and using svoja wouldn't make any sense there. Okay, ready for the last example, the tricky one? Páči sa mi moja mačka. Maji sa páči jej mačka. So the verb páčiť sa has a really similar meaning to mať rád. It means to like. The translation that I put here is the same. Maja likes her cat. But páčiť sa as a verb works a little bit different grammatically than mať rád. The grammatical subject of a sentence with páčiť sa is the thing or person or animal that is liked. And the grammatical object of a sentence is the person who likes the thing. I don't know if you have a verb that works like this in your language. Let me know in the comments if you have it. I know many languages have it. English doesn't, but English used to have it. English used to have like, it pleases me. So anyway, even though the meaning of these sentences is similar to the meaning of mám rada svoju mačku and Maja má rada svoju mačku, the grammar is different because even though Maja is still the owner, Maja is not the grammatical subject here. The cat is the grammatical subject, which means we cannot use svoju, we have to use jej. I hope this was useful. As always, I want to remind you that the way that you really learn a language is not by listening to me explaining grammar or looking at tables of possessive pronouns. The way to really learn a language is by reading and listening to a lot of comprehensible input. For example, by listening to stories where you have the grammar in context and you can acquire it naturally. Okay, that's it. Čaute!